I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Nir Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies. Today on Prosthetic Gods, we are thinking about the next 4 years under Trump 2, and we have a lot of different topics to address. But how you feel, Nir? It's been a shocking week, but I'm bucking my feelings up by thinking, well, this is punk rock time. This is, this is the dystopian future that I've been waiting for, and now I'm prepared.
There you go. So from our respective bomb shelters, we can think through the implications for tech. It might actually be the one area where things are a little bit more nuanced, but we'll see. We'll see what you think. Yeah, it's been a weird week to wrap my head around, for sure.
Well, when you expect the worst, you will always be pleasantly surprised. Usually be pleasantly surprised. We'll see. Yeah. Maybe there are things that we have not yet anticipated that could come out of this. But the first thing to say is that there is an expansive technology agenda that's been articulated by the Trump administration as opposed to, or the incoming Trump team, as opposed to the almost complete lack of attention that they gave to it last time. And Elon Musk is very much at the center of that. How's that make you feel?
Yeah.
I think we both share feelings about Elon Musk.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that basically the question of what tech policy is going to look like under Trump administration is to a large extent similar to the question of who Elon Musk is, what he wants to accomplish, what his agenda is. I've listened to, preparing for today, I've been following Musk for years, but I've listened to a lot of his recent interviews. I guess one of the things that bothers me the most about him is this kind of Nietzschean sense that the rules don't apply to him, that he's allowed to be as pissed off as he wants about any question of process if it slows down one of his great ideas of, colonizing Mars or what have you. And, that's in addition to the other thing that are worrying about the advent of this administration, that attitude itself is a concern.
Yeah, they are going to break things and move fast. Or at least that's what they think they're going to do. We're going to see how much resistance the political system can put up. But yes, there's a widespread plan to gut the federal civil service and replace it with compliant, loyal soldiers who will carry out an agenda of robust deregulation, tax cutting. And then the question is, I think, partly if people like Musk would like to see a commitment on the part of the United States to encourage innovation in the way that they see it. That requires some federal infrastructure. An example is the CHIPS Act that the Biden administration successfully passed and that has been encouraging the reshoring of artificial intelligence, in particular the chips required for artificial intelligence, to the United States. And Trump has said that he might cancel that because he prefers tariffs. So there may be, what's the best way to regulate tech or to encourage to achieve some of these goals. In the case of industrial policy, they seem still more allergic to the idea of the government giving money to preferred innovators as opposed to just putting a tariff regime in place that encourages domestic production. But that's an example of some of the nuance of what's happening.
Yeah, so let me ask you about that, because it seems like there's pulls in different directions here. So on the one hand, there's this anti-regulation agenda, which both Trump and a big part of the people who he's going to bring on board are favorable to. But Musk himself is an existential AI existential risk guy initially, so he is famously among the founders of OpenAI and has been pretty consistently voicing these fears of existential risk from AI. right? If there's credibility or consistency to that, at least at that level, that would require some regulation. Do you think he's dropped that? Do you think he's fickle on that? Do you think that's a genuine concern?
Well, the Trump team has definitely been hostile to the Biden AI regulatory apparatus, and it's one of the regulations proposed, the antitrust investigation of Google, the regulations imposed on crypto, the disinformation, the attempts to discourage disinformation during COVID. It all added up to a picture. So I'm losing track. I'm so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I'm losing track. But this. The Biden AI initiative has definitely been rejected. Okay, so the question is about Elon Musk and his existential risk and whether that will lead to his supporting some kind of regulation from this administration. The Biden AI regulation attempt was voluntary. It was just a set of guidelines. And even that was rejected by the Trumpers as being too restrictive, a set of regulations on AI. So the idea that they're going to come in and say we need something more restrictive in order to prevent AI apocalypse seems unlikely. On the other hand, AI apocalypse fits into a kind of nationalist narrative that we don't want China or other regimes to get a jump on us. And the kind of militarization and nationalization of artificial intelligence might, in fact, be something that a nationalist regime would pursue.
Yeah, I mean, in some way, the AI question is an example of a larger dynamic that might be in play here, right? Because there's 2 points of focus that you can have on regulating AI. You can sort of think about the apocalyptic questions, the kind of sexy big questions of, what the possibility of doom or P-doom or percentage of doom is from AI. And Musk seemed fascinated by this, and it's a kind of cosmic level, life and death, existential stakes kind of question, which seems to fire up his imagination. Then there's the kind of humdrum, more sort of, if you will, boring questions about inspecting training data and inspecting weights for algorithmic bias, and making sure that AI is not quote unquote woke. My sense is at least somebody like Musk would say, think about some regulation in the context of existential risk, and then screw regulation in terms of making sure that the AI is biased or not biased. That seems consistent with with the kind of interests and positions he's had in the past. So that would broadly be my guess. Or do you think he's just going to walk away from the whole thing?
I've always been suspicious of Elon Musk's advocacy on the part of existential risks from artificial intelligence, because his behavior as an entrepreneur, his release of Grok, was not consistent with the idea that these models were going to be leading to existential risks. Grok was his own shockingly successful attempt to meet Claude and ChatGPT toe-to-toe. And he said that part of the architecture of Grok would be trained on a lot of Twitter data, which made it already suspect, but that it was going to not have censorship and and not try to suppress misinformation. The Grok that we've seen in X itself is actually hilarious, because it will summarize people's complaints about Elon Musk and about X itself, and just present relatively factual statements about what's actually happening on the platform. But Grok as an open source model is an example of part of the risks that he is attempting to do something to the market, as is Zuckerberg, to become a provider of these open source AI models that other people can build on, as a runaround the Google and chatbot models. And part of the problem with that would be that these models are immediately then taken and incorporated into foreign adversaries' armamentum. And if you imagine this becoming a national security concern, which in fact it already is, then these open source models are a threat from that perspective, as opposed to the models that are more locked down. So that's the basic argument about why Musk, when he says, oh, those guys shouldn't do that because it will lead to existential risk, while he's doing what he's doing, then it leads to some suspicion that he doesn't really give a shit.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the case of somebody, both like, there's many psychological similarities, it seems like, between Musk and Trump. And it seems like with that kind of personality type, the past and past behavior are not necessarily a perfect guide for what's coming because there's so much fickleness and there's so much volatility and there's so much kind of impressionistic changing of mind that the fact
Well,
that.
yeah, we don't know how this regime's going to behave, and he's been appointed now to his own government agency, along with Vivek Ramaswamy, the Doge. With a wink and a nod, it's named the Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. And this could just end up being, a blue ribbon panel that advises that you could save money here and you could save money there. We've had those before, in Simpson Bowles, et cetera. Or it could be catastrophic because they're planning to change Schedule F and gut the administration.
Yeah. I guess what I would say is this. We don't know yet. There's a suspicion that tech policy under Trump is going to be co-equal to what Elon Musk wants because he's the most senior tech person associated closely with the administration. Or Trump could just say, I mainly want you in charge of Doge and I'll listen to you on tech, but you won't be calling the shots. If he is calling the shots, certainly the kind of grandiosity that he's been displaying very recently. So getting very angry, for example, when the EPA the Environmental Protection Agency was getting in the way of SpaceX firing their rockets because they were destroying some habitats, etc. You get a very sort of Ian Randian character who says, I'm a genius, I'm making important things, fuck all of your regulations, this is for normal people, not for me, I'm populating Mars, I'm solving the climate crisis, et cetera, et cetera. So we just have to move and move and move. If you move fast enough and break enough things, by the way, that's one of the definitions of fascism. That's a different question, but
and another definition is a corporatist relationship between oligarchs and autocrats, and that's what we have. Yeah, we have richest man in the world with his own, who spent $44 billion to buy a communications platform and helped shift an election toward an autocrat, and now they're two best buddies. And his other best buddy is one of the leading oil manufacturers in the world, not to mention our domestic oil manufacturers. So it's an autocratic fascist regime of oligarchs and this autocrat.
Yeah, quite potentially. Again, I guess with the one caveat of complete unpredictability. Historically, at least some of the oligarchic fascist regimes were a little bit more predictable than the people who are in charge of this one. But
I was saying in our earlier meeting, I was talking about Perón, I think, with you guys. But anyway, Perón has been much on my mind because I think we're all going to get an education now in the flavors of autocracy. And Perón is one example that sticks in my mind because of the class realignment that had occurred in this election, where working class, especially men, but also working class Black and Hispanic men, voted for Trump. And so at any rate, I think we have to be aware that there are non-far right, there are non-traditionalist autocracies, and there are traditionalist autocracies. Most of them are traditionalists. The Iranians are, whatever they are, medieval. And the Russian is now, that version of fascism is promoting itself as traditionalist. But in the Peronist phenomenon, you see, and in places like Venezuela, you can have the same phenomenon of autocracy and have different politics. So within the Peronist party, you had left and right-wing factions. This is, I think, one of the things, I can't imagine trying to work with any Trumper right now. But if Trump dies and Vance takes over, Vance has there are more places where you could imagine a progressive economic agenda connecting, or a progressive agenda of some kind.
He's promoted some legislation along those lines as a senator. Before he, had his Trump flip. To kind of summarize this first point in some way, one big question, and this is mainly questions about the direction of tech policy. One big question is tech policy under Trump going to be pretty much co-equal with whatever Elon Musk wants? I think it's a somewhat open question. If it is co-equal with what Elon Musk wants, you can expect a Randian sort of personality, which says, I'm too brilliant for any of your stupid stupid regulations, so take them out of my way, combined with a conspiratorial mindset. So he's quite publicly, supported conspiracy theory ideas that the Democrats were allowing as much immigration as they were so that they could swing future elections in their directions. He was promoting conspiracy theory that tech billionaires supported Kamala Harris because she was going to keep the Epstein client list secret, and they were anxious about that. So all kinds of pretty out there stuff. So you have the Randist personality combined with conspiratorial thinking, combined with some actual brilliance, combined with a pretty consistent thought that AI is going to move into AGI, and that there's not a ton you can do to fully control AGI. That's my take on Musk
and a lot of government contracts, an increasing interweaving of his personal finances with the space program, communications. It's going to be. He's a difficult nut to untangle, because even the Biden administration didn't know quite what to do with him. He could say the most treasonous thing against the Biden administration, but they still relied on him to provide, satellite services.
And he would be nothing without government money, which is, like there is a question when does he start sort of cutting down the branch that he's sitting on, right? Because
for him to team up with Trump when he's been a big advocate of a green economy and electric vehicles and battery technology, Trump famously said at some point in this election cycle that he had been opposed to electric vehicles, but now that he was getting backing from Musk, he had to be for them, which indicates Trump's, completely unserious approach to all these things. It's quite possible that he has no serious convictions about the Green New Deal, but he said, he's campaigned for 8 years against environmental protection, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So that was one of the biggest inconsistencies in this alliance.
Yeah. So I guess I want to go back to push you on one thing that we just started touching on in the beginning. Before the campaign started in earnest, before the presidential campaign started in earnest, the differences in tech policy between the outgoing Trump administration and the incoming Biden administration, I don't think were absolutely that dramatic. And some of the people even who worked on AI policy for Trump stayed on for Biden. And it seemed like for a bit it was a bipartisan issue. And for a while, some of the stuff in Biden's AI executive order was not even, since it was a pretty light touch regulation, wasn't even that controversial among Republicans. And I have a suspicion that it was rebranded as controversial for the election, and that it may come back. I mean, so for example, Musk again supported Gavin Newsom's California regulation of AI. So do you think that they're going to continue the line of this is left-wing lunacy AI regulation in the actual administration? Or do you think it's kind of going to be one of the few areas in which there's a sort of technocratic realignment back to Biden?
Well, both parties are loath to admit that there's any continuity in their policies. But it is certainly true that Trump had no love for big tech in his first administration and was open to antitrust ideas about how to deal with big tech and regulate big tech. Biden continued that. He appointed Lina Khan. And one of the big questions is Lina Khan's, is the hostility that corporate titans like Andreessen and Horowitz feel towards Lina Khan and towards the antitrust efforts of the administration, is that going to mean that Lina Khan gets axed? And Horowitz or Andreessen actually said when he gave money to Harris this time, he said he would love to see her gone. So I think there's an open question there. It's like if they lean into being a multiracial party of the working class, attempting to defend the working class against, corporate titans, then the antitrust agenda makes a lot of sense. But if they're just going to be an oligarchic fascist party, then probably not.
Yeah, and JD Vance and Lena Khan are friendly. I think they know each other from law school, and they.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There are elements of J.D. Vance that aren't entirely that don't fit a traditional far right narrative. His concern about working class policy and lives is, I think sincere, but who knows? Who knows with J.D. Vance? But he could very well end up president. There's I think 1/3 chance that he's going to become president through a death this term.
Since you brought up antitrust, I think there's good reason to expect that. Antitrust pushes in the end, with all we said, will kind of be completely marginalized, except when it comes to Google, with which they have historical beef.
Right. The Google antitrust case might be something that the Trumpers feel should continue, which could potentially mean the breakup of Google into 2-3 different companies. But yeah, in general, the right doesn't like antitrust because it's a form of government regulation of business, and this is the bottom line for most of them. It's the bottom line probably for Bezos and Zuckerberg's sitting out any kind of partisan efforts this time. And so, Bezos not having the Washington Post endorse this time, and Zuckerberg, I think they both are looking for at least not a hostile regime. Zuckerberg, both of them have had hostility from Trump in the past, and it hasn't played well for them. So they would like to not be under the heel of the boot.
So if we hypothesize that Google gets screwed, but everybody else is sort of broadly left alone, what do you think that means for AI and for competition on developing large language models? Does it mean a huge advantage for OpenAI?
I think the news this week, ironically, is that the large language models are slowing down, and that means that there are as yet unknown forms of intellectual architecture that will be required in order to get them to go to the next place that they're going. And people are placing bets on reasoning and so forth. But I think if you took seriously the notion that everything was scaling, we just get more data, more processing power, and eventually we will get all the things that we want out of LLMs, then you were thinking in this direction of trillions of dollars of expenditure, and every data center needs its own nuclear power plant. If we actually are going in a different technological direction, it changes some of how we think about this future. But at any rate, I don't know that there's going to be a direct impact of Trump on LLMs. I don't think that he has a regulatory agenda towards LLMs, much less towards the existential risks that they might pose.
Yeah.
But have you seen anything? I haven't seen anything.
Well, no, I'm just speaking from a run-of-the-mill competition standpoint. If OpenAI, say, hallucinates and Gemini starts hallucinating a lot less, then it's overall good for consumers because OpenAI becomes concerned about being as good as Gemini is. If, however, Google's in trouble and it doesn't have money to put into developing Gemini, or because of being broken up, its competition with OpenAI is harmed, then you get a sort of more of a monopolistic picture on large language models. You still have the others, but still those are the main.
The argument for leaving things to capitalist competition is that something better would come out on the other end. And the argument for a public utility is, hey, if it takes $2 trillion to build the infrastructure to deliver electricity to people's homes, we don't want 5 different firms spending $2 trillion building that infrastructure. And so the part of the question for LLMs is, if they were on a trajectory to, there's a market concentration, they're going to compete, only one can really afford to be the best, and that one, like Google, would suck up all the competition, then we would be in the same anti-competitive situation with LLMs in the future, and that would be a strong argument for a public utilization of the LLM industry or services or something like that. The universal basic compute idea that Sam Altman's been promoting.
Yeah, but that's nowhere on the table. That's not.
It's not as well, not in this administration at any rate. But if the competition is going to go in a direction where you're going to have little ones in your pocket and you're going to have 10, 15 different flavors of them, and they won't, and all the progress isn't requiring scaling to trillions of dollars of data, but in fact, other kinds of innovations. I think it's a much more competitive marketplace than originally imagined.
Gotcha.
TikTok.
Yeah. My daughters wanted to make sure that I ask you about this one.
Yeah. I have always been quite sympathetic with a national security argument that having the Chinese state apparatus have access to all the behavioral data that TikTok generates was a bad idea. So I did not oppose the insistence that TikTok be sold to a non-Chinese owner. And I'm also a TikTok user, and I do not see any nefariousness in TikTok itself, other than the broad statistical evidence that anti-Chinese views are suppressed on TikTok and pro-Chinese views are boosted. And ironically, one of the anti-censorship initiatives that Trump says he's going to pursue is to ensure that there is no shadow banning or shadow boosting of anyone on social media platforms. And it's like, dude, you benefited from the fact that leftists were being shadow banned and banned on Twitter, and you were being let, back on.
So how does a nationalist anti-China president change their mind and say, actually,
TikTok's fine.
Yeah. China's backdoor to all of our data is totally fine with me?
The reason he got there is because he realized that more young people didn't want to ban TikTok. He it's a part of his general anti-censorship thing, but also it was an appeal to youth, and I don't know if it had any effect. I saw a lot of anti-Trump stuff on TikTok, but then I had to ban a lot of Trump accounts as well. So, TikTok's probably going to survive. We'll see how consistent any of these anti-censorship things.
Yeah, well, speaking from my Jonathan Haidt admiration here for a moment, not the best news for teens' mental health, but I know that that's a different argument for a different day. I was very much hoping that it will get banned.
There's broad bipartisan consensus around no phones in school, so you should be happy with that. The John Haidt neoconservative argument seems to have been heard on that case.
Yeah.
Well, it's around the world. Everyone around the world is thinking about schools and phones.
One of the few pieces of good news this year, yeah.
I guess. We'll see if it has any impact on learning.
Yeah.
I think there's a higher ed dimension to all this. The anti-censorship stuff, did we already mention this, that it includes a threat to sanction and withdraw funds from higher ed institutions that censor their students or faculty, by which they mean any kind of DEI policy or...
No, we didn't talk about that yet.
We didn't talk about that? Well, that's on the table.
Yeah, it is. It's not tech policy, at least not directly, but yeah, it's very much on the table.
Comes out of the censorship idea.
Well, if we're in the general neighborhood of China, what do you make of the potential changes in Taiwan policy and the impact there on chip making?
I think if you worry about the geopolitical, we could imagine easily Trump bombing Iran. He assassinated Soleimani in Tehran. And so if there were to be a Middle East war expanded by Trump, by his support for Netanyahu, the complete obliteration of Gaza, whatever's on the table now, then the other domain in which geopolitical conflict is almost certain is China wanting to take back Taiwan. And there, it seems that Trump's transactional approach to international policy, his aversion to use of American military force, means that he will not be putting any resources into building the chain of defense from India to Japan that the Biden administration and in general, the foreign policy blob in Washington, D.C. have wanted to build an alliance of countries to defend against China's expansionism in the South China Sea, and in particular, their accession of Taiwan. Japan would be immediately implicated. They're only 50 miles away from Taiwan. But also Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, everybody's in the region is being threatened by China's expanding imperial ambitions in the region. So I think it's very likely that China will see Trump's accession now as a permission structure, because the only thing that Trump has said about Taiwan is that he would put tariffs on China. And it's like, oh, well, you already, you're just going to give more tariffs.
Yeah.
That's the only, when you put a fine on something, it means that the rich can afford it. China's rich, so it's rich in this respect. It can afford whatever tariffs Trump wants to put on them.
The geopolitical importance of Taiwan for our economy is kind of analogous to the geopolitical importance of the Gulf to our economy in the 70s and 80s. As we've become more oil independent, we've become much less chip independent. And so much of the hardware that makes AI run is actually being manufactured in Taiwan. And as you say, the Biden administration was pretty committed to defending it from a Chinese attack.
Reshoring from TSMC, getting TSMC to build chip manufacturing here in the United States, and they were successful at that, but also commitment to military defense, more or less. I mean, we've always been in this strategic ambiguity situation with Taiwan. It's like, we don't really think you're independent, but we're going to treat you as independent, all that kind of stuff. So we never really said what we were going to do with Taiwan.
Well, Biden got pretty close, though, I think.
He got very close, yeah. He said off the record a number of times that he would defend it, yeah.
And reshoring, just to be clear, would take time. So if you said we had to sort of start up chip manufacture in the U.S. that would satisfy the demands of industry, that couldn't happen tomorrow.
No,
that would take a while.
It's still, even if we had the factory that TSMC is trying to build, I think it's 5 years until it's ready to go.
Right. So, and imagine a 5-year delay. And I wouldn't care, to be completely honest, because of my my profound
your dreams fulfilled.
Slowing down of run-amok AI development in that sense could be a fortuitous side effect. But abstracting from that for a moment, the question is how serious is Trump about sort of not wanting to use American power to defend other countries? Can you extrapolate from the position on Ukraine, for example, to the position on Taiwan? He has said, which is bullshit, he has said that the Taiwanese stole our secrets when it comes to chips, and now they're blackmailing us to defend them, and that you have that you can't blackmail us with something wrong that you've done to us in the first place. That sounds like a pot of crap to me. They didn't steal our secrets.
It reminds me of the Hindutva people in India who they have a deep mythology about how everything invented in the world was invented in India, was there in the Rig Veda.
Yeah.
Everyone's just copying from India and not giving us credit.
Yeah. Reminds me of my big fat Greek wedding. There's a scene there where the Greek dad says that absolutely everything except Windex, I guess, was invented in Greece.
Well, yeah, let's just take a step back. I think one of the things, or take a step up, I think one of the things that we need to see this as is the end of a decisive turn in the American empire. Because Trump, if he threatens NATO, if he threatens our commitment to defend places like Ukraine, it's a decisive finger to the post-war liberal order that the U.S. has been hegemonic in. So from that kind of internationalist perspective, we're the beginning of something new that could be more democratic on an international scale. Except the problem is that he is in alliance with the autocrats as opposed to the Democrats. So.
Yeah. No, there are some noises here of a kind of empire deciding that it's done with being an empire. I guess and there's certainly a history of empires doing that. That's the trajectory of empire, basically. One question there, since, as you say, he's in cahoots with the autocrats who make a lot of money from the advantages that being an empire gives you. To to be much more concrete about this, isn't our leadership in tech closely related to that kind of international hegemony? So can you stay the kind of leader in tech that you are while not being a hegemon? Can you have Silicon Valley with the kind of comparative importance that it has while, sort of slowly becoming Great Britain on the international stage?
I think that there's this Thucydides trap idea that has dominated the discussion with China, and the rise of China being a pretty sure marker that we're going to eventually be at war with them because we're the old empire and they're the new. And then the question is, why do new empires rise? And I think there's a strong technosocial story to tell there that almost every empire was supplanted by another empire that had a set of technosocial practices that turned out to be better. It's a version of the guns, germs, and steel, except technologies in their part of the story. So China has an indigenous scientific capacity. Obviously, they didn't steal everything from us. We do have to shore up our information security from industrial spies and at the federal level as well, because China is way too successful at penetrating Western systems. That said, I think there is a lot of indigenous. I mean, the number of patents filed around the world, the number of scientific papers, the number of engineers educated, China's just way ahead in a lot of these dimensions. So there's a complete shift in terms of the center of gravity of science and technology in the world, and that's going to have military implications and economic implications. Now, in the short term, China's economy is in terrible straits between their various debt crises and the fact that they may face another trade war now. I wouldn't trade the United States situation for China's situation, but I think we have to see that we're in a technological competition, and our competition with China is going to drive a lot of tech policy, artificial intelligence policy in particular.
Yeah. So it seems like we're in for 4 years of completely unchecked AI development, given that if you sort of read news from 2 years ago about where AI was, it seems like that was the Stone Age. That's a lifetime in AI development. And it's going to be 4 years in which it's going to be almost illegitimate to talk about restrictions on AI development, or it's going to be unlikely that any kind of talk like that is going to be heard. So given the rate in which we are progressing, and given the fact that a lot of very smart, credible people are saying not just as hype that we are going to have AGI in 5 years, I guess one question is, can we afford 4 years of unchecked AI development?
Yes. I mean, we're in the situation that the accelerationists have wanted to be in, a government that says, do whatever you want and we'll see where it lands. And there are left-wing and right-wing accelerationists. The right-wing ones are the ones who think it will always land well if you let the market do their thing. And the left-wing ones are like, people need to see what capitalism does, know? And this is going to be a big educational opportunity. So I do think, I'm still expecting technological unemployment to start appearing in the next decade, which would mean a decline in the number and the proportion of the population in paid employment. We already see a decline of traditional full-time careers. And that kind of economic precarity is what has helped contribute to the economic discontents that led to this result. So technological unemployment, I think, is coming one way or the other, whether we achieve the AGI goals or not. But as I was saying, the progress towards AGI, I think people are more pessimistic this week because of the widespread acknowledgement now that the success with scaling is not working. And so it requires new kinds of architecture. People are betting on adding reasoning so you can try to boost how smart the thing is by giving it more data, or you can try to boost how smart it is by how much it thinks afterwards. And they're doing more of the thinking afterwards now, and hoping that will do the trick. I think there's a lot of questions about how intelligence works and what common sense means, and all of that we're kind of working out in real time empirically how all that fits together in our heads. But I do still expect whatever AGI means. I expect AGI in short order.
Yeah, and just to that point, one of OpenAI's two new models is focused on reasoning rather than on collecting more data. And
yeah, the O1 models, they're like a third of their processing time is now devoted to reasoning to try to figure out if they've given you the right answer or not. And it appears not to help with everything either. But so it may be that, trying to figure out what it means to have common sense. You have the system that's extensively trained, and it can give you what appear to be astonishing PhD level answers about things within its competence, and then it tries to just use something that it should know from that domain into another, and that's where we see a lot of failures. So that ability, that's the general part, the ability to generalize and to have a general model of the world. And we don't see that happening quite yet. I mean, I think the modelers see it because they're working with these things all the time, but it's not quite where it needs to be yet.
Yeah. The larger point I was trying to make to you earlier about how long 4 years is in the span of things is, in general, in public policy, people say you have to get ahead of things. But when things are moving so fast, there's a particularly good reason to get ahead of things. If you're right that economic unemployment is coming, massive social and economic kind of change are coming, there's just no way, whether you're on the right, the left, the top, or the bottom, there's really no way practically to address the consequences of that without wonkish policy thinking. You got to plan for that one way or another. 30% of people say are going to become unemployed. They're 25% in the next 10 to 25 years. What do you do with them? How do you pay for them? How do you make them not upset? Blah, 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 blah. And it seems like, given the preferences of the current administration, we're going to put ourselves behind in that process by at least 4 years, so that there's not going to be policy planning for the coming economic unemployment. That's
But the Democrats don't have a clue either. I think part of
that's interesting.
The answer for the Democrats' electoral dilemma is to do a thorough rethink of what kind of policies they're promoting and how they promote them. And there's a lot of zhuzh behind the argument that they should be more Bernie-crat. But I would say Bernie has not really wrapped his mind around what a social democratic agenda for technological unemployment is, right? Because it's still a full employment model is what they're thinking about. The left really needs to pull away from this commitment to full employment and towards something that includes perhaps efforts to encourage job creation, but also acknowledges that that's a short-term policy goal, because in the long term, jobs are going to be scarcer. And that's very few people in the policy domain are thinking that way.
Yeah. So, Jay, we talked a lot about Elon, and understandably, so let's talk a little bit about some of the other tech titans in the industry. Jeff Bezos didn't exactly cover himself in glory in the run-up to the election, nor did Mark Zuckerberg. Where do you think their relationship with the administration is going?
Well, we're in the midst of this political differentiation in Silicon Valley. The bulk of Silicon Valley is still slightly libertarian, Democrat, socially very left-wing.
When you say the bulk, do you mean the workers or the bosses?
Well, definitely the workers, but even the VPs, even the CEOs and the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, they went majority for Harris this time, not for Trump. But the richest, the fact that the richest are tilting and that they see some kind of strategic interest in being part of the oligarchic team, or at least not being under the boot of the oligarchic team. I mean, if you think about Russia, not every oligarch is on Russia's Putin's team, but they don't want to be not on his, they don't want to be an enemy of his team either. So I think that's where they're at. I think I understand why they're doing that. It's tragic. I mean, I wish the Washington Post had endorsed. I don't think it would have made any difference. But yeah, so I think they're all trying to figure out what to do in this situation. It's like the Pope trying to deal with Mussolini coming to power or something.
Yeah, yeah. So just to sort of state the obvious and make sure everybody's on the same page, Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, retracted, withdrew, stopped the newspaper's endorsement of Harris and said that the newspaper would, moving forward, not provide political endorsements in and of itself. I think that's a good idea. As many others have said, the timing seemed very suspect. The timing seemed to be playing nice with the Trump administration. Bezos as well as Zuckerberg, for that matter, have gotten burned with the administration in the previous iteration and wanted to get on the good sides. I do think, to your point, that this is moving closer to a Putin-style relationship between between leadership and its oligarchs, the kind of unspoken deal that emerged there in the 90s and moving forward was that the oligarchs are allowed to gain as much wealth as they want if they kind of stay out of politics or if they kiss the ring politically.
And same in China.
Yeah. And what that means essentially is that you have a worldwide realignment into a sort of Brave New World version of authoritarianism, where the autocrat becomes smarter and rather than becoming a violent dictator, sort of becomes a softer dictator and gets the rich people to stay in their lane, right?
Which is something that we need to talk about more. I think a lot of people rightly worry that techno-authoritarianism could be a more stable form of autocracy than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, because it's more in line with human nature.
Yeah. And I think China's model of what the sticks and carrots of a day-to-day totalitarian regime should look like. I think their imagination about it, whether they've been able to build it yet or not, their imagination about it is terrifying to me because I think it could be a very stable form of the boot always on your face.
Yeah. It's literally the move because of efficiency reasons from a 1984 version of authoritarianism to a Brave New World version of authoritarianism, which understands that that softer version, is much more stable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is a nice break for us. This is going to be the one episode where we largely agree. We ran out of energy for fighting, so we had to have a policy catch up. There's one more issue that we didn't cover. What do you think is going to happen on the prevalence of open source AI? So this debate about whether the code that runs the large language models, the powerful AI systems from the last 2 years should be proprietary or publicly available.
Well, since Musk is one of the principal creators of an open source model, I presume that there's not going to be any attempt to crack down on open source. But I did note that I think the national security arguments and competitiveness arguments, that there are arguments for why open source AI models should be restricted or more regulated. But I don't think Musk is going to go there. So yeah, it's good. We're going to let it rip. We're going to have AI, as much AI as we can possibly handle.
Is that bad for Sam Altman and his business model?
Well, as I was saying before, I think that there's an idea now that maybe you don't have one AI that does everything, but you have an infinite variety of AIs that are more efficient, more accurate in their domains. So it could be that the marketplace is not going to be open AI and nothing else, but some basic open source models that do all the natural language processing and have some basic reasoning that everyone then builds particular applications on top of. And so we just don't know which direction it's going quite yet.
Yeah. I guess I would say immediately for the kind of conversations that we've been having in our work, the argument that the main problem with AI systems has to do with algorithmic fairness, bias, accuracy, hallucination, I think that's going into deep freeze for 4 years. I think nobody I don't think anybody cares in this
Well,
administration.
it may become illegal, in some of these proposed policies, even saying that you're trying to eliminate racial and gender bias in your system may become illegal or something. But what we do about algorithmic bias, because, as I pointed out, you can't say that there should be no shadow banning or shadow boosting of people in social media platforms without having a policy about bias. That is a bias, right? That you're talking about a bias.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of which biases they want us to have.
It's actually a very concrete issue, I think, policy-wise, because if you're going to have 4 years of unaudited data going into very many practical systems, that's going to have an exponential effect on their performance. So essentially, look, we talked about this a while ago, predictive policing and other predictive analytics systems that are being used by the courts and by the police. They have some bias data going into it. They've been working on improving it. There's been some improvements on it. Dangerousness assessments are not more than 40-50% accurate, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly. And not only are they inaccurate, they tend to assume that minorities are more dangerous than non-minorities. If you have 4 more years of shit data going into that being uninspected, the systems are going to get worse. On the one hand, and they're going to continue being used on the other because A, nobody's going to care, and B, because they are cheaper than the alternative. So you are creating a kind of long-term policy problem for yourself.
Well, in the first place, the data is going to continue to be biased if it's generated by human behavior. That's where the biases that we're talking about come from.
Yeah, that's right. But the question is, do we do quality control or not? And it seems like we're going to start not doing it.
Well, the way I imagine quality control for something like police bias is you collect historical data about, say, recidivism, and you say, oh, African Americans got arrested at a higher rate, therefore they have a recidivism risk. And then you say, well, no, actually, we're going to put our thumb on the scale because we know that racist policing practices was part of the reason why they got arrested more. So we're going to change this algorithm statistically, which is a hell of a lot easier to do than trying to debias cops' brains. And so you can debias the system
algorithmically.
That itself may become illegal, though.
Yeah.
And this is where we're going to come into conflict with the European Union's Act. The European Union mandates that every social media platform has content moderation and various practices that may now become illegal in the American social media space.
Yeah.
So we could see a fracturing between Europe and the United States.
Yeah, so you're going to have more shit data and less legitimacy for even statistically fixing the models or the weights. And by the time it's going to be fine to fix the models and the weights again in 4 to 8 years or whatever, the data will have become so bad that it's almost like you don't necessarily need the models to make the predictions.
Whether we fix the weights or not, I think there's a broad agreement that it's acceptable and good practice to monitor all these systems for their outputs, to figure out what they're doing and whether whether we want to tweak what they're doing. So I don't think there's a right-left dimension to that.
Hold on though. If I'm Bezos or if I'm Mark Zuckerberg with the great moral courage that they've been displaying, why would I be putting money into supervising that if I didn't have to?
Well, yeah, it would be a regulatory intrusion, and the firms don't want it.
And the government doesn't want it.
Well, I think the government does want to know if, for instance, TikTok is radicalizing youth. Is the rise of Antifa caused by Facebook algorithms or not? I do think everyone from left to right wants to know those things. And then the question is, well, what do you do if there's tangible evidence that there's some kind of algorithmic bias? What do you do about it? And I don't think this regime, besides saying you should never suppress right-wing speech, but I don't think they have very many good opinions about that.
Well, we seem to be agreeing that a shitstorm is coming our way, so maybe that's a good optimistic note on which to end today.
Yes, invest in nuclear. That's the
nuclear and gold. All right, man.
Okay,
See you soon.
Talk to you.